now we're on to the problem of Isaiah 53. Normally Isaiah 53 is seen as the go-to passage for penal substitutionary atonement. Now, let's say you're going to translate from one language into another. And in your language, you have 5 words that each have a different connotation. So let's say the first word is a good connotation, the second word is a bad connotation, the third is a connotation for work, and the fourth is a connotation for family, and so on and so forth. We have lots of different connotations. For instance, if I use the word walk, that has the connotation of legs. We don't use walk for snails, and so we don't say a snail walked 2 miles. But it's not because the word walk literally means have legs, it's just that it's a very heavy connotation. So, if I'm translating something from the Hebrew into the Greek, or from the Hebrew into the English, or from the English back into the Hebrew, or one way or the other, I have to take connotations into account. But one of the problems that we have is that Hebrew will have one word that has this much meaning, and we have 5 words that each have this much meaning total. So, I could use a word in English that has a very narrow meaning, and part of this is because English has so many words. Hebrew doesn't have that many words, only a couple thousand words, and then you have just derivations on all of those, whereas we have many, many thousand words. So for instance, if there's a word in Hebrew that has some ambiguity to it, part of the problem that the translator faces is which English word should I use, knowing that the English word means something much more specific. And you would have this problem if there was a double entendre. If the double entendre means these 2 things, but we don't have a word that means both of these, we'd have to pick one word and we'd have to leave off this other meaning. So we have this problem multiple times in Isaiah 53, and I'm going to point out a couple of these words. Some of this, if you don't know Hebrew, will be above your head, and I'm not trying to pull the scholar card on you. I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I just know how to use a lexicon, and I know how to look up words. But I want to point out some words to you, and I just want to appeal to some common sense that I think that we can have about words. The first word I want to talk to you about is called Suball. This word appears 2 times in Isaiah 53, and oddly enough, it's translated in 2 different ways, and I'll show you how that works. So the first time it shows up is in chapter 53, verse 4. And when it shows up in 53, verse 4, I'll read the verse. It says, "Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted." Now, it's the word carried, and carried our sorrows. The word carried, that's the word Suball. This word shows up again in Isaiah 53:11. So just keep in mind the word carry. Now in verse 11, I'll read this. "Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities." The word bear is the word Suball. So we have in verse 4, it translated as carry, and we have in verse 11, it's translated as bear. Now, this might not seem like a big deal, and it wouldn't be if we didn't have very specific connotations for these words. And the connotation difference is this. If I talk about bearing up under something, you can think of like Atlas holding up the world. He's bearing up under this load. It has the idea that the load is heavy. And if I talk about carrying something, this can have the idea that I am not just under it, but I'm lifting it up. It's the idea that my strength is in view. And this is just a little bit of a difference, but if I have bear their iniquities in verse 11, and I'm thinking of penal substitutionary atonement, I might be thinking, oh, the iniquity is just being poured on him. But if I decide that it's to carry, then what am I thinking? I'm thinking that Jesus is carrying our iniquities away. So this is the first word difference. The second word difference that makes a difference for our atonement theory is the word hifgia. This word shows up in verse 6 and verse 12. So I'll read the verses and I'll point out to you which word it is. So verse 6, we all like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Hifgia is he let fall on him the iniquity of us all. That is the word hifgia. So keep that in mind. He laid on him the iniquity. Now we're going to go down to verse 12, and it's going to say, therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death, and was numbered among the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many, and makes intercession for the transgressors. Well, hifgia here is he makes intercession. That's a big difference. He let fall on him the iniquity is different from he makes intercession. We have two very different meanings for that in English. Now, the way that this word works is if you have two things and you make them meet, you're the one who's interceding. So let fall on him the iniquity is a weird way to translate this. It should be intercede. And there are other verses in Isaiah that would lead us to believe that it is intercede. Go to Isaiah 47:3, and the word intercede will sometimes show up, or it will say plead with, or I will spare. So the context, the idea of interceding is there. This is the same word, hifgia. That's Isaiah 47:3. Then Isaiah 49:16. God is lamenting and says there is no one to intercede. So this happens again. And then in 64:4, it's translated as to meet. So it's a little weird that it says let fall on him the iniquity, which is, it makes sense in Hebrew, but it doesn't make sense in English to say let fall on him and then to say he makes intercession. So in atonement theory, if we're highlighting that, we want to say he makes intercession, which is a big deal. So let's read verse 6 if it said he makes intercession. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord had him make intercession. So this is something that all atonement theories agree on, but when you say laid on him the iniquity of us all, you prejudice the view, and I think in an undue way, since they're perfectly happy to translate this word as intercede everywhere else it shows up in Isaiah. Another word of note is the word nasa, and this word is sometimes translated as to bore or to lift up. So we know it says he bore our sickness, or bear their iniquities, or bore our sin. And this is Isaiah 53:4, 11, and 12. And you can go back and read those. But nasa is not simply to bear. Think of the problem that we had with the first word. It's not merely to bear under, it is to lift up. This is the same problem. It's the exact same problem, to lift up. And to show that it means to lift up, let's go to Isaiah 52, just one chapter before this. He shall be high and nasa, lifted up. Isaiah 52:11, bear the vessels of Yahweh. Well, what's the difference here? When you bear the vessels of Yahweh, are you being crushed by them, or are you lifting them up? So even there it should be lift up the vessels of Yahweh. And then 52:8, lift up their voice. You don't bear your voice, you lift up your voice. So does Christ lift our sickness up and away from us? Yes, he does. Does he lift up our iniquities? Does he lift up our sin? Yes, he does. So this should be seen as a neutral thing, but what it does is it gets rid of the connotation of penal substitutionary atonement, because I think that penal substitutionary atonement in Isaiah 53 relies solely on English connotation and not at all on what the Hebrew says.